AUN, American Underground Network.
The primary reason why the individual citizens of a country create a political structure is a subconscious wish or desire to perpetuate their own dependency relationship of childhood. Simply put, they want a human God to eliminate all risk from their life, pat them on the head, kiss their bruises, put a chicken on every dinner table, clothe their bodies, tuck them into bed at night, and tell them that everything will be all right when they wake up in the morning. This public demand is incredible, so the human God, the politician, meets incredibility with incredibility by promising the world and delivering nothing. So who is the bigger lie, the public or the Godfather?
All revolutions have been led by young people. If you just think of the TV images of whether it's Tiananmen Square or whether it's the revolts in Central America or Europe, the young people, it's the college people who are more principled and not locked in and they're not embedded with the government. They are the ones who are concerned about their future because the future is theirs.
My research has shown at this point that the future laid out for us may be just about impossible to change. I do not agree with the means by which the powerful few have chosen for us to reach the end. I do not agree that the end is where we should end at all. But unless we can wake the people from their sleep, nothing short of civil war will stop the planned outcome.
It's the National Collective Consciousness Show with Dee Dee Farrell in Portland, Oregon, Jim Condit Jr. in Cincinnati, Ohio, Steve Harris in Charlotte, North Carolina. Now, live from Evanston, Illinois, your host, Fred Smart.
Hey, thanks, everyone. Another great Thursday night. Great to be back. Every week we've been doing this for 11 years now. This is our anniversary month of this show back in 2007 when we started. We have had so many events throughout our country's history, and just in the last 11 years, big things have happened to change the course of American history and has ramifications all over the world. But in the wake of these events, there are very dedicated people who are sweeping up and collecting and dissecting and writing out, comparing, analyzing, using facts and seeking the truth to share the truth. And one of the most esteemed people as a guest person we've ever had on this call is Professor Jim Fetzer. We've been very honored to have you on, Jim, over the years, and it's a pleasure to have you back on tonight. As we said in the pre-call, I don't think you were on about the Parkland shooting. We did talk about Las Vegas last fall and then Charlottesville before that, but I know there's a lot going on, but you mentioned that you wanted to talk about recently Tucker Carlson interviewed Bobby Kennedy in the wake of some of the release of the JFK files by President Trump. One thing that kind of fell through you can tell us about, I think you're talking about that windshield. But a lot of good information is coming out, Jim, and thank you for keeping track of a lot of this stuff. This call, by the way, is being recorded and will be uploaded along with graphics to our new YouTube channel, everyone. Our YouTube channel just was launched in the last week. It's aunetwork.tv. The show last week was compiled with graphics and uploaded by Stephen's son, Steve Harris, and it just got completed a couple of days ago. We only have 6 subscribers to the channel. I'm one of them. So please visit YouTube, subscribe, and share the links because this call will be put into YouTube format over the course of this next week. And it's a lot of work, but Steve Harris' son, Steve, has agreed to do this. Thank you, Jim, for coming on and joining us once again tonight.
Absolutely, Fred. It's a great pleasure. I actually just watched that interview of Bobby on Tucker. And Tucker, by the way, is probably the guy most worth watching on television today. He cuts through all the smoke and mirrors, gets down to the baseline issues. He did an interview recently with a Southern senator asking him what was the United States interest in being involved in Syria. And the senator began to respond, well, if you're a friend of Israel, and Tucker cut him off and said, I understand Israel's interest. What I want to know is what is the American interest? And of course, the senator tried to, mealy mouth some sort of answer, but it's clear we don't belong there. It's one of many American interventions in the Middle East that were inspired by 9/11, which, as you all know, was an orchestrated event brought to us compliments of the CIA, the neocons in the Department of Defense, and the Mossad. Actually, Christopher Bolin, I interviewed very recently. He's been wonderful about the politics of 9/11. Added it was actually Israeli military as opposed to the Mossad per se, but I think that for most of us, the word Mossad covers. There is a new video out, by the way, by a fellow named Mark Oliver entitled America, a Nation Deceived, that I want to recommend about 9/11. It's really an excellent piece of work, and I was glad to be able to make contributions toward its success. I think that if the American people only understood that Syria is a democracy, that Bashar al-Assad is a democratically elected president of Syria, that he enjoys a greater degree of success than any recent American president, particularly including the president incumbent, that they'd be rather shocked, because we're supposed to be in the Middle East to promote democracy and freedom, and here we're trying to take out the democratically elected president of Syria. Of course, the only reason it hasn't worked out after we created ISIS in 2012, and it just is insulting to me to see John Brennan, who was at the time the head of the CIA, being interviewed on CNN or MSNBC when he was one of the participants in the decision-making, along with Hillary Clinton and Secretary of State and Barack Obama, which Mike Flynn, as the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency at the time, opposed, by the way, which is why Brennan would subsequently recommend to Barack Obama that Flynn be fired. So he was fired for sticking up for principle, and, that the United States shouldn't be creating a terrorist group to put pressure onto the Syrian government and then to be used against the Persian nation of Iran. It might well have succeeded, but for the intervention of Russia and Iran on behalf of Assad at the request of the Syrian government, where any U.S. involvement is a blatant violation of international law. We are not in Syria at the request of the Syrian government, and we're, in violation of the UN Charter, just as was Trump when he launched all those cruise missiles into Syria. He did it twice. Both times were blatant violations of international law. There are only two conditions under what one nation is allowed to attack another. That's if they have the permission of the UN Security Council, which of course was not the case, or if confronting an imminent threat, you're entitled to make a first strike, but that's also obviously not the case here. So I've been extremely disappointed with the Donald, particularly given that he campaigned on an America First platform that he was going to get us out of the wars in the Middle East and reallocate resources to benefit the American people. And sad to say, he's done something closer to the precise opposite. I want to talk about, I was dismayed that Bobby Jr., talking with Tucker, seems to be very ignorant, not only about his own father's death, but also about that of JFK. I mean, he did allude to the windshields, and of course what he's talking about there is the fact that Jack was hit at least 4 times, and by the way, David Bandig, who's a leading expert on the medical evidence in the world, believes there may have been a 3rd shot to the head, interestingly. But Jack was shot in the back, 5.5 inches below the collar to the right of the spinal column, shallow shot, didn't go anywhere. Then shot in the throat by a bullet that passed through the windshield. And in the very famous Alton's photograph, if you look where his left ear would be, if his left ear were visible, you can see the small white spiral nebula with a dark hole at the center, which is indicative of where the shot passed through. And then after the driver, William Grimm, pulled the limousine to the left into a halt, of course, he was hit twice in the head, once in the back of the head, slumped forward. Jackie used him back up, and he was shot in the right temple by a frangible exploding bullet. What happened was that the vehicle was sent back to Ford Motor on Monday, the 25th, the day of the great state funeral with all the leaders of the foreign nations here, and the riderless horse and the carriage and all of that. And the vehicle was stripped down to bare metal and replaced. We even tracked down the official responsible for replacing the windshield, who confirmed the through-and-through bullet hole, and they'd come from outside in, bevelings on the inside. But then they replaced it. The Secret Service, a new windshield was put on, which was subsequently replaced by yet another that had a cracking from a fragment fired from behind. And so, you know, what Bobby does or does not know about Bobby Jr. does or does not know about the windshield, at least suggested he knows something about it, but not nearly enough. I mean, if he just listened to one of my shows with you guys talking about JFK, he'd know vastly more. I'm hoping that he might track down my latest. I did a 2-hour overview back in January entitled JFK, Who is Responsible and Why, with Brian Ruhe, R-U-H-E. You can get that on BitChute, B-I-T-C-H-U-T-E. Which is where YouTube can't get it. You may or may not be aware, but YouTube's been going after me with a vengeance, taking down so many of my videos, especially stuff related to Sandy Hook, and also trashing people who have interviewed me. Mike Adams was dumbfounded when he discovered an interview he'd done with me back in 2015 about the banning of the book Nobody Died at Sandy Hook. Had been taken down by YouTube, and his channel had been taken out, where he had over 1,700 videos and 200,000 subscribers. Now, he came back on the air. Yeah, I know. He did an interview with me about it because he was so dismayed. This happened about, I would say, maybe 3 months ago now, and it was 6 or 8 weeks had passed before he would put it up. But when he put it up, it was fairly spectacular because it was with the heading, Most Dangerous Mind in America Interviewed on False Flags and Extreme Criticism, and he was so designating me. He'd actually brought that up toward the end of the interview, but I thought, he was probably never going to run it. You can find that at naturalnews.com, and it's fascinating because there was so much focus on Sandy Hook, and in fact there are some perps who came in and made some objections to research on Sandy Hook that gave me the opportunity to respond, and one of them, I'm convinced, is the man who poses as Letty Posner. I'll give you an update on that too because it's really fascinating. Am I missing something? I mean, there's a lot of background.
Yeah, we have some background noise somewhere, Dee.
Yeah, I don't know where that's coming from, but yep, there.
Someone's got the TV on in the background. If you could please mute your phone.
Yep, we'll start muting people, Fred, right away if it doesn't go away. Okay, there it's gone. Okay, good.
All right, sorry, Jim.
Thank you.
That's all right. Well, what's so damn interesting is in the meanwhile, we've been able to establish that Noah Posner, who is the most unusual victim of Sandy Hook, because he not only died on 14 December 2012 in Newtown, Connecticut, but again on December 16th, 2014 in Pakistan, where Lenny had sent Kelly Watt a death certificate for Noah that turned out to be a fabrication, the bottom half of a fake, the top half of a, the bottom half of a real, the top half of a fake with no file number, the wrong estimated time of death at 11 a.m. when the shooting took place between 9:35 and 9:40, according to the official account. Well, we had in the meanwhile been able to prove that Noah Posner was made up out of photographs of his fellow, supposed to be his older stepbrother, Michael Vabner. So, we have transitions. You can see Noah turning into Michael. We did a whole complete study, the same eyes, same ears, same general shape of skull. I asked Larry Rivera to create a GIF, and you can actually see Noah turn into Michael Vabner. Well, there's several fascinating developments therein because Michael Vabner is now graduated from high school. In fact, he has a web page He's working for some IT firm in Boston, and you can see from his webpage it's the very same guy. This is Noah Posner, all grown up. He's alive and well. Someone has been coming into my blog and taking out these photographs that show Noah turning into Michael Vabner and all that. It's really very disturbing. But the additional establishment we have made is that Lenny Posner, the reason he's concealed his face and so forth on television, for example, Showtime has a program called The Dark Net, and they did one on Sandy Hook featuring me and Lenny. But whereas you can see myself, my face so well defined, it's probably the best image of my face I've ever seen on any video production. He stays in the shadows. And he claims that so his image won't be abused, it'll be misused. Well, we turned out there's a bit more to it because just as we have established that Noah was made up of photographs of Michael Vabner, Lenny is actually Reuben Vabner, Michael Vabner's father. His name isn't even Lenny Posner. So we've exposed this thing rather thoroughly. Wolfgang Helbig has come up with a photograph of 8 of the Sandy Hook girls looking real perky and cute. He's got another photograph of even more of the Sandy Hook girls and 4 of the Sandy Hook boys, including, Noah Posner, a.k.a. Michael Vabner. And it's clearly the guy, and with his website and all this, we've really nailed it. So whoever is coming into my website and has taken down this blog, for example, before I've had several of them about Sandy Hook taken down. And because it turns out that Michael Vabner in college, University of Connecticut Stores, majored in economics, but he had courses in software and, web management and all that. I think it may even be Michael Vabner, a.k.a. Noah Posner, coming into my blog. In any case, we have done a pretty thorough job of demolition about Sandy Hook, and yet, nevertheless, they continue to feature people. I don't recall, Fred, if I mentioned when we did the Charlottesville that the woman who played the role of Heather Heyer's mother, where Heather was supposed to have been killed during the car crash, but wasn't killed during the car crash. She actually died the following day of a heart attack. But the same woman who plays Susan Bro, Heather Heyer's mother, actually played the mother of Victoria Soto, one of the teachers allegedly killed at Sandy Hook. So we got the same crisis actor playing the role in Charlottesville, playing the role in Sandy Hook. She's been feted. They put her on the, I think it was MTV Awards program. They let this crisis actor host the show. The New York Times did a feel-good piece about how a girl who'd been pushed out of the way by this black guy when the car crash occurred, where he allegedly had been hit, had gotten married. And, the fact of the matter is they were playing it up, how romantic this was, but he was a stunt man. I mean, he was one of the guys who was photoshopped into the photograph, very dramatic, put on the front page of the New York Times, which still had it wrong about the driver because it wasn't a 20-year-old schizophrenic. It was this 32-year-old military guy who commands a battalion in Ohio. They still had wrong that, about Heather Heyer's death. They still had wrong about the 2 Connecticut, Virginia state troopers who were supposed to have died in the helicopter crash. But where we have a video of them walking away from the crash, and it's very clearly the same 2 guys in their flight uniforms. They didn't die at all. So we have all this nonsense. I published a piece, therefore, about the New York Times celebrating a Charlottesville stuntman, a shop photograph, and a crisis actor who made her debut at Sandy Hook. I mean, the New York Times has played a completely despicable role in all of this. So that's a little bit of background about those cases. With regard to Parkland, which I guess I haven't addressed with you before, very elaborate. They actually had to apply for the permit a minimum of 180 days in advance of the March 25th date for the March for Our Lives because it involves closing roadways in Washington, D.C. The Mayor's Special Events Task Force's SOP requires a minimum of 180 days. That's 6 months in advance. So they were applying for the permit began in August or September for the 20.
Before the shooting. We're all well before months before the shooting.
Of course, and yet they would claim that it was the shooting on the 14th, on Valentine's Day, February 14th, that had justified it. We actually had a wonderful report from a sergeant at the Metropolitan Police Department in response to an inquiry. He didn't realize it was a hot topic when he answered from a friend of Ole Damagard about when the permit was issued, and he said, it had been issued months in advance, and there was months of prior planning in addition. And he was very specific because he identified it as the March for Our Lives held in Washington, D.C. on 25 March. Now, when he realized he'd made a blunder by letting the truth out, he has now given 4 different dates for when the permit was issued, but it's all just ridiculous. In fact, you'll love this too. Tony Meade, who has done a lot of brilliant work on Sandy Hook, was the first to notice that there weren't any obituaries up for the 17 Parkland victims, so that Dan Cromer actually on a Friday published a piece. I published it on my blog about how there were no obituaries for any of the Sandy Hook victims. I put it up at 12:59, and I think by 3 or 4 o'clock, they suddenly appeared, because I sent that particular article out to an email list that included the sheriff of Broward County and his deputies and seveul newspapers.
Now, wait a minute. Within a few hours, these obituaries mysteriously appeared on the net?
Yeah, after I published them, they say they weren't there. But it's even worse than that. It's even worse than that. Oh, my God. We had been wondering why, because this is a very upscale community, a very wealthy community. Yeah. The school, 3,500 students, why there weren't, just hundreds of videos from this attack and all that, because every student has their own cell phone and all. Well, a woman who calls herself Sane Progressive, and she's really wonderful. Her actual first name is Debbie. I mean, I adore this woman. She's so good, and she's done wonderful stuff on Las Vegas and now on Parkland. And she reports here about how she went through. There's like 4 hours of footage, and she goes through the 4 hours of footage again and again and again. She can't find more than about 4 dozen, max 60 students anywhere. Which is considerably short of the 3,500. Well, it turns out, because it was Valentine's Day, schools in Florida let their students out at 1 p.m. They let them out early. So that this may explain exactly why, after the March for Our Lives, David Hogg, this young student who turns out to be, the front man for the gun control movement, and I'll say a few more words about what's really going on here, told CBS 6 hours after he gave his speech at the March for Our Lives in Washington, D.C., how he'd heard something was going on at the school. He'd had to jump on his bike and ride to the school as fast as he could. I think he'd gone home after school had been let out one and forgot that this was the day they were going to tape the event, and then was reminded and had to rush back to the school. So you got him doing this footage beginning at 3 p.m. He's claiming they think that it's unconfirmed that Nicholas Cruz is the shooter and all that. There's so much nonsense associated with this. Let me give you a few illustrations. You have students who claim to have been shot. One woman, recollecting her name, Maddie Wilford. She's shot in the stomach, she's shot in the chest, and she's shot in the arm. This is allegedly with an AR-15. Now, if you're shot in the stomach or the chest or the stomach with an AR-15, you're dead. You're not up and about, and yet within 7 to 10 days, she's up and about. A doctor making most absurd remarks you've ever heard, if you understand about what's going on here, saying that these were large caliber wounds when the AR-15 fires a small caliber. It's a .223. It's a .22 caliber shell. Not large caliber at all. It does so much damage because it's high velocity, and it tends to rip up all the muscles and the bone inside the body. He explained away her miraculous recovery, saying young people tend to heal fast, which is, of course, just a manifest absurdity. We got another girl, Samantha Fuentes, who is supposed to have been shot in each leg, and yet she's walking around after a week later with Band-Aids on her wounds. This is very interesting because not only did the New York Times publish stories about these girls and their miraculous recoveries, but they did a little video about experts explaining the damage done to legs, shattering bones, ripping up muscle. by being hit with one of these weapons. And, you know, if Samantha Fuentes had been hit with one of these weapons, I mean, she wouldn't be walking at all, much less out strolling around with a reporter and being interviewed. Now, it turns out what they used was something called simunition. It's simulated ammunition. It's made out of beeswax and laundry detergent. In other words, they were hit by a kind of a round that would make a welt but would not penetrate the skin. That's why their recovery was so miraculous. Turns out the whole event was produced by Debbie Wasserman Schultz. I mean, I'm giving you my conclusions now, not laying out all the evidence, but I've laid it out many, many places. I'll give you some advice where you can find it if you want to see it in detail. Debbie Wasserman Schultz is the straight former head of the DNC, worried that there's going to be a trial of her IT aides who were spying on the members of Congress using her authority as their cover. That of course, the Russian hacking meme has been falling apart, and all the corruption involving the DNC in collusion with the Department of Justice, that the Democrats are going to do very badly. In fact, she was worried about losing 11 seats in Florida. So what they decided was to make gun control, resurrect the gun control issue to try to salvage her prospects for 2018, and they've been going about it with great gusto. So they used this simulated, simunition, simulated ammunition. No one, in fact, was killed. The reason that not only was she the producer, but they recruited a Hollywood director, a woman named Dina Katz, who does Dancing with the Stars and who's organized many of these big marches. I think she, in essence, was the director. Then Sheriff Scott Israel was the local arrangements chairman, and the reason he had to keep poor deputies out was because they weren't snapped in on the drill, and he was worried they might actually shoot one of the players. Okay, the whole thing is completely ridiculous. Among the most powerful proofs we have is a 52-second video from LiveLeaks inside a classroom. And you hear the students doing their best, performance of crying, and yet one is talking about her bottled water. Bottled water, by the way, is ubiquitous at these drills. Another is looking at her iPod. You got a kid pulling his putts. You look at the ground there, and there's what initially you might think was a body, but it's a training dummy. It's black. It doesn't have any arms or a head, and it's sitting on fake blood. We saw fake blood in Boston, too, of course, where when you appeared through the smoke, you saw bodies lying there with missing arms and legs, but there was no blood, which is a physiological impossibility if their arms and legs had been blown out by explosives. But, in fact, what they were using in Boston was amputee actors. You know, it's the sort of thing that would never cross the mind of an ordinary American. You know, it was naive about all these things, just as no one would imagine they were using simulated ammunition, or that the school actually let the kids out at 1 p.m. so they could conduct a drill. And there are police officers going in and out, which would take you in because they are in uniform if you didn't know that Parkland gave up its police force in 2004. So these aren't the Parkland cops on the scene. These are actors wearing police uniforms. I suspect if Dina Katz had known that Parkland gave up its police force in 2004, you probably wouldn't have had them running in and out. Just to give you an insight into the background here, Debbie Wasserman Schultz is a dual U.S.-Israeli citizen. She's extremely corrupt. She who sabotaged Bernie Sanders' campaign, gave 13 primaries to Hillary to guarantee she'd be the candidate. Dina Katz, of course, is a Jewish producer, director. The Sheriff Scott Israel campaigned not just to be the first Jewish sheriff of Broward County, but he was quoting the Talmud. Now, those who are unfamiliar with the Talmud, there's quite a difference between the Talmudic Jews and the Torah Jews, where the Torah, of course, is the first 5 books of the Old Testament. That's what we normally think is the basis of Judaism. The Talmudic Jews trace back to the Babylonian Talmud, and they believe in Jewish superiority so great over the other races that the other races actually only exist to serve the Jews. They're referred to collectively as the Goyim. You can lie, cheat, steal, or even kill the Goyim with impunity as long as it benefits the Jews. And I'm sorry to say, there are good Jews and bad Jews, and I'm not suggesting anything otherwise. I'm not being anti-Semitic, although there's an ironic aspect to that, because it turns out that the occupants of Israel today, based on DNA studies, actually are descendants of Khazarians and not of the tribe of Judah. They don't have Hebrew blood. That means they're not actually Semites, so that because Israel, the Palestinians actually are Semites, it turns out, ironically, that Israel is the greatest practitioner of anti-Semitism in the world today. But the fact is, there are good Muslims and bad Muslims, good Christians and bad Christians. I mean, Dick Cheney and George Bush, brought us, they were cooperative in 9/11 and getting the U.S. involved in all these wars to benefit Israel. And we have slaughtered some 4 million in the Middle East. I mean, that, in my opinion, is not being a good Christian, just as there are good Muslims and bad Muslims, including the Wahhabis from Saudi Arabia, who behead the infidels who don't believe as they believe and turn their women into sex slaves. In fact, there are stunning remarks that have been made by some of the leaders of Israel. I mean, truly astonishing stuff. Ariel Sharon, for example, after 9/11, boasted, don't worry about American pressure. He said, we own America and the Americans know it. Menachem Begin made very vile remarks about the other races being, as inferior to the Jews as insects are to humans generally. And even Bibi Netanyahu in 1990 said that America was the golden calf, and that we're gonna suck it dry and divvy it up and chop it up piece by piece, because that's what we do with nations we hate. We're going to kill it slowly. This is Bibi Netanyahu, the present PM of Israel. So I want you to understand this is very serious stuff. I'm convinced all this gun control is through the schools is an effort to disarm the United States. There have been, by the University of Hawaii's Democide Project, there were 19 genocides in the 20th century, each of which was preceded by gun confiscation. And because of the cumulative effects of these staged shootings, and every one I have investigated turns out to be staged, and I'll tell you more about Santa Fe. I have looked at quite a few. I'm presently completing a book about Parkland. I'll be doing a book about Las Vegas. I leapfrogged Parkland over Las Vegas because there are still oddities about Las Vegas that are trickling out. I'll talk about a few of those too. But the fact is, we know what's going on here. We've been able to prove it. All my research is collaborative. I bring together 12 to 15 experts, as in Sandy Hook. I had 13 contributors, including 6 current or retired PhD college professors. I mean, the odds that we're going to be wrong about these matters when we're doing all this collaborative research, I got to tell you, are very, very remote, very small. I mean, maybe we're going to get some detail wrong here or there, but we're not going to miss the big picture because we're critiquing each other's work. We're professional scholars. The PhD is a research degree. It's a certification of your ability to conduct scholarly research on serious subjects and to make substantial original contributions. So let's see. So the whole thing with the school shootings are best viewed as campaign commercials for the Democratic Party. Debbie Wasserman Schultz was worried they could lose as many as 11 seats in Florida alone. So they're doing something desperate. They've gambled on it. Making gun control the centerpiece, and it's based upon a number of popular beliefs that turn out to be false, including, for example, that the greater the amount of gun ownership, the greater the amount of gun homicides and gun violence, when the facts are precisely the opposite. It turns out that extensive studies have been conducted and that the countries that have the highest percentage of gun ownership, such as in North America, the United States, and Canada, have among the lowest homicide rates. Areas such as Latin America, South America, especially Brazil, that have low gun ownership have among the highest homicide rates. Africa, low gun ownership, high homicide rate. They banned guns in the UK, and now they're suffering from knife epidemics. In fact, they've had more homicides because of knives. In London, they've now surpassed the mortality rate of New York City, which is rather remarkable in and of itself. I did a piece about this gun control business entitled The Second Amendment and the Politics of Gun Control. And you can find it, I think, at 153news.net. And because these are going to sound odd, they're not just YouTube, because YouTube has been taking down so many of my videos. We got to put them up at sites that are safe from YouTube. So that one, the Second Amendment and the Politics of Gun Control, I think you'll find that at 153news.net. I did one on Parkland.
We got those links in our newsletter, Jim. We got those links.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Wonderful, Fred, wonderful. Do you have the Parkland puzzle, how the pieces fit together?
No, I didn't get that. We got, yeah.
Well, okay. Well, it's up a couple places. It's up at Vimeo. The Power Hour, when I was on the Power Hour, they put that up, and it's still up there. So if you look for the Parkland puzzle, how the pieces fit together, you can find it there. It's also, I think, on DTube. I mean, you got to get familiar with these odd alternative sites where videos are posted, because I can't just put mine on YouTube any longer and expect they're going to remain intact. What they did in Santa Fe was to kind of flip the schedule the opposite way. They had the event go on at like 7:20 in the morning, when the school doesn't actually, classes don't actually start until 7:50. We have one of the crisis directors caught on film. She's, I'd say late 40s, early 50s, short gray hair, directing the students who look completely bored. There's no intensity. There's no anxiety. We have another photograph of her talking to students sitting on the steps inside a bus, holding their bottled water. Once again, as I say, that's a real tell. Jim Stone was brilliant about this. He noticed right off the bat that there were trolls galore on every website reporting how they personally witnessed this shooting in Santa Fe. Well, it's ridiculous. There were too many of the trolls. You know, it happened too fast, even on relatively small websites. Then he discovered the Facebook page for the alleged shooter was only 3 weeks old, that it featured this trench coat, which was adorned with an iron cross from Germany, a little red pin for Antifa. But I looked at the collar. You know, it's got a leather name identification for the manufacturer, and it shows no, you know, it's a fresh leather name insignia, meaning this coat doesn't appear to have even ever been worn. The kid has a Greek name. He apparently went to a Greek Orthodox church, sang in the choir, played football. He claimed he was being bullied. There's a brilliant piece by Miles Mathis, by the way, taking apart the whole theory of the motivation, because he's supposed to have shot a couple of art students. Well, why would a kid, you know, was he supposed to have been bullied by a couple of 63-year-old art students? Miles surmised, I suspect he's right, that the art building was simply separate and apart from the rest of the school, so it was easier to pull off the scam using the art school. It's another phony, completely phony. No one died there. I have correspondence from the area, you know, reporting everything about it. And, you know, I in some detail, there are several programs I do where you could get updates. So one is called the Goldfish Report I do with a woman named Louisa every Monday morning. Another is Truth versus News, spelled capital N-E-W $, with Scott Bennett, who's a former Army Intel and PSYOPs officer, and Michael J. Anderson, who is a Vietnam vet, which is done out of a Seattle community TV studio. Those are both really good. Scott, by the way, and I did a show with Kerry Cassidy about Las Vegas, where Kerry Cassidy was also taken out for featuring me after doing a show about Parkland. She found she was being taken out too. She rather courageously brought me back just about a week ago on analyzing false flags. So that's one of the most recent. And that, I believe, is at BitChute, B-I-T-C-H-U-T-E. And that's particularly good in relation to what we're talking about here, because I included several videos the 52-second from live leaks about inside the classroom at Parkland, where you can see the training dummy and the fake blood and the police who can't possibly be Parkland police because they don't even have a police force. Also, a new video they've released from storming the penthouse, the suite on the 32nd floor for Stephen Paddock. And what's really interesting about this video, which I included there, by the way, is that they come in and they survey the room. They count the number of weapons, and where we've been told there were 23, the count they get when they come in is only 13. Although we've seen photographs of a body on the floor, they don't show a body on the floor. Other of them are reporting none of the windows in the suite are broken, which makes the whole thing ridiculous. What this means is, once again, the government's evidence contradicts the government's account. Mona Alexis Presley, who'd been tracking the obituaries from Las Vegas, and finding that to the extent they had a foundation at all and weren't merely photographic variations of one another, they were based on people who died in different states or on different dates or from different causes of death, also turned up the police map for the square mile around the concert area where the shooting allegedly took place. And everything on the police map from 8 p.m. on the first to 8 p.m. on the second, and there are only about 20 entries, is totally routine: stolen property, recovered automobile, burglary, a domestic disturbance, nothing about any shooting, which is perfectly consistent with my Facebook friend who called the 3 closest hospitals. Remember, you not only had over 50 killed, but there was supposed to be 500 injured. It was a swamp, the medical facilities in Las Vegas. So she called the 3 closest hospitals, and they asked, did they have any gunshot admittees? And all 3 said no, they didn't have any gunshot admittees, where one cheerfully added, I think you're calling about the drill, but no one was actually shot. You ought to check with the local police. I even called the same hospitals and got the same information. She gave the phone number, except the woman who had apparently been so cooperative just said no comment, which I said at the time I interpret to mean a no. These are getting ridiculous. They've even put out a phony contrived video about Orlando. I'm sure I've explained before that the permit for the Pulse Club in Orlando had expired 3 years in advance, meaning the club wasn't even open. It was closed at the time. It had 150 occupancy. If they had crammed in over 300 people, as they claim, so that, let's see, I guess the number dead at Las Vegas wasn't 50. I'm thinking about Orlando. It may have been, a higher number. But the fact is, none of them have panned out, none of them. And we continue to get people say, oh, I know somebody who died, and I asked for the name, and Mona checks it out, and turns out to be somebody who's moved around a whole lot of times, meaning they're a crisis actor themselves, or somebody who actually initially wasn't shot, but later found there were benefits from feigning to have been shot after all. So, we have yet to find a single death from these various events. Yeah, Fred.
Hey, Jim, real quick, Las Vegas, on the wake of that incident, or that show, whatever you want to call it, there was one guy who painstakingly, with a very high resolution video camera, zoomed in and scoured visually every nook and cranny of every wall, of every a piece of asphalt, and it was sent around and went viral. But I guess there's no evidence of any bullet holes or any holes anywhere. Was that legit?
Yeah. It was a movie. They used a pre-recorded soundtrack that had the sound of machine gun and military weapons on it. Dan Cromer, who published the article about the missing obituaries for Parkland, was the IT guy who figured that out, and then they had it correlated with the special visual effects, which included a flashing a light on the 4th floor in the middle of the Mandalay Bay to simulate a machine gun, and then 3 light flashes on the higher floor to simulate American military weapons. Interestingly, Mike Adams had studied the soundtrack and determined there were sounds of shots from at least 2 different directions, which is fine. He just didn't realize the soundtrack was pre-recorded. So, he was making the mistake of supposing it was legit. it was much too high quality. You could hear it all over the place in Las Vegas, because they put this pre-recorded soundtrack on the PA system. Then they had begun recruiting crisis actors for Las Vegas 15 days in advance, an outfit in Los Angeles called Crowds on Demand. So my surmise is that the crowd may have been seated with as many as 500 crisis actors. So when they finally got their cues, they start screaming, "Oh, we're being shot, blood, blood," and all that. And of course, the rest of the crowd is simply being played. But I mean, I can't begin to tell you how much proof we have this whole thing was managed and completely fake. We have one student who's got Anastasia Smith has gone through 33 videos, and you hear lots of sounds of shots, but you don't see anyone being shot. We do have a video where you can see a guy turning to fire on the crowd. You can see the flash from his barrel, but no one's hit because he's firing blanks. We have yet another video that turned up where a crisis director actually gets in front of the camera to have her crisis. This is during the alleged shooting. She actually gets in front of the camera to have her crisis couple redo their scene, and then she's embarrassed that she was recorded, but that got out too. So, the proof that this whole thing was staged, we have them transferring 3 bodies from a funeral home hearse into an ambulance in order to be presented as, victims of the shooting. Intel Hub thought they'd scored a mini coup by discovering a mini massacre at Hooters because there were 17 ambulances pulled up in front of Hooters. But they had video from inside that showed a whole lot of bored crisis actors, each with their own sheet, waiting their turn to be carried out on the stretcher as another victim. It turns out that the coroner for Clark County shut down his office because he was being besieged with requests for death certificates and autopsy reports. He didn't have any. Well, a freedom of action information request led to the judge directing that he must release them. So since he didn't have any, he scrounged up. He went to 6 different coroners around the world and came up with 53, 56? Autopsy reports, none of which have ballistics analysis, which is absurd. They have their file numbers and their names stricken and no ballistic analysis, which is absurd because these are all supposed to be victims of a shooting. Meaning the absurdities of Las Vegas are just, ridiculous beyond belief. It's embarrassing. So they've released this new little video from Orlando, and it's fascinating in and of itself too, because you're supposed to be seeing the shooter inside. You're supposed to be seeing guys dancing there. In fact, I have a correspondent who wrote to tell me it wasn't even a gay club. But the fact of the matter is, it only had 11 parking spaces, so that if you'd crammed, over 300 people in there, there would have been a lot of abandoned cars if 50 had been killed and another 53 injured. But they aren't there. There are no abandoned cars there. And what they did in this little video, they didn't realize how much they confirmed that it was a hoax because they have some footage from outside that does have a date time stamp, and you don't see any abandoned vehicles there. They have some footage from inside where police are coming in that has a date time stamp, but it's innocuous. It's just coming into the entryway. Then you have what's supposed to be the shooter, but it suddenly doesn't have a date time stamp. You see some footage that's supposed to be these guys dancing, but it's very roomy. I mean, there's lots of room there, lots of elbow room, not crowded at all. Ridiculous for a place with 150 occupancy. And then they show more footage, elevated footage, aerial footage of the whole area surrounding the club, and there aren't any cars anywhere. No cars anywhere. And may I observe as well that the Orlando Emergency Medical Center declared a few months thereafter that they weren't going to charge for any services rendered for the obvious reason that they didn't render any services and they didn't want to be prosecuted for fraud. So, their efforts to substantiate these cases by creating these videos are backfiring. I've just given you 3 cases, 4 if you can include the live leaks from Parkland, that demonstrate these are all fraudulent events. So they're pushing the gun control agenda. I'm convinced this is a Zionist attempt to take down America. It's very, very bad. You have a number of cities that are falling for it. You may know Deerfield. That's probably in your neck of the woods, right, outside of Chicago.
Yeah. Yep.
Deerfield, Illinois has passed a new ordinance where they're fining their residents $1,000 a day if they don't turn in their so-called assault weapons, which is a name just made up. We had the Boulder, Colorado City Council banning assault weapons and elevating ages to buy weapons in Boulder. You got a California, a congressman by the name of, something like Slewell, W-E-L-L, Slewell. It's real odd. I've seen him on TV a lot. He makes very forceful arguments when he's introduced a bill to confiscate, to take all weapons away from Americans. I'm trying to recollect if it went beyond the so-called assault weapons. But he's saying if people won't give them up voluntarily, then they should take it from them by force. Anybody who thought that this business was, they're not really going for gun confiscation. I mean, look, they're going for gun confiscation, and it's simply absurd. As I explained in this video on the Second Amendment and the politics of gun control, not only do they have it backwards in relation to gun ownership and homicide rates. I mean, you have a choice between high gun ownership and low homicide rate, or low gun ownership and high homicide rates. But gun crimes have been steadily falling. Between 1993 and 2014, for example, gun violence in this country dropped by more than 75%. Even though at the same time in Chicago, which, mind you, is gun-free, it's been skyrocketing. I mean, if you want to see what happens when guns are banned, just look at Chicago. There's an experiment going on right in your own backyard. It's ridiculous. In fact, it's so bad that a city councilman has even made an appeal to the United Nations to send in UN forces. I mean, ignoring the fact that you got mayors and governors and a president who could take various measures, with the National Guard or federal troops or whatnot. He went right to the UN. It's really ridiculous. And it turns out there are three different levels. I mean, I thought I should explain this rather systematically where security is affected by banning guns. The first level is personal and family security. Suppose, for example, there's an intruder trying to break into your home and you're unarmed. You call the police. Well, it can take the police as much as 20 minutes to show up, and meanwhile, all the mayhem is taking place in the first 5 or 6. So while you're waiting for the police to show up because they have guns and you don't, your daughter may have been raped, your wife may have been murdered, you may have been mugged just because you couldn't defend yourself. In the second level, at the community or social level, what if, riots in Chicago spill over into Deerfield and they start looting and maiming and all that? I mean, how could the people of Deerfield defend themselves? They could not. Or what if a motorcycle gang came into Deerfield and started tearing up the town and raping the women? What are the people of Deerfield giving up their weapons going to do? A better model is Northfield, Minnesota, where you may recall the famous story when Jesse James came to rob the bank. The citizens were prepared and they shot up Jesse James' gang. I mean, it was really a wonderful display of American resilience. And then, of course, most importantly, at the national security level, Emperor Hirohito, before World War II, contemplating invading the United States, but he was told by his highest-ranking military advisors it would be a colossal mistake because there'd be a sniper behind every blade of grass. So Hirohito did not invade the United States. If these gun grabbers had been at work then, we'd all be speaking Japanese. But the fact is, the world's largest standing army is China's of some 2.5 million men, probably larger by now. But we have an unofficial army of 100 million armed Americans. Why anyone would want to abandon that tremendous advantage for the United States to keep us a free and democratic country is beyond me. But this guy Slewell, he's a congressman. He swore an oath to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States from all enemies, foreign and domestic. And here he's sabotaging the Second Amendment. I mean, some of these people are truly disgraceful. I'm glad to take questions about that. I will talk about Bobby, but this is probably a good time if you want to, anything about these.
Yeah. Could you, speaking of guns or speaking of murders, we talked just briefly when I called you earlier today about the Clinton body count. Now, this has been out there for the longest time, Jim, and as you've seen, there seems to be a dual justice or application of justice in America when it relates to the Clintons versus everyone else.
Yeah.
Are we reading too much into that, or is that could
No. You're absolutely right. I mean, they had corrupted the whole FBI and the Department of Justice. They were basically an extension of the DNC and the Clinton campaign. I mean, all the stories that are coming out are so sordid. I'm very glad to say that we have an Inspector General for the Department of Justice by the name of Horowitz, who appears to be a man of absolute integrity. And there are a whole lot of dominoes that are going to fall in the next 10 days or so, as I surmise. The Clinton body count has to be around 200 by this point in time. I mean, there were a number of women who were inconvenient to Bill Clinton who wound up dead. You had Vince Foster, who I believe was actually murdered in the White House and then planted in this park, You also had Hillary, by the way, putting pressure on Vince Foster to put pressure on Webster Hubbell, who is running the Department of Justice, and who, by the way, if you don't know, is the father of Chelsea Clinton. That's not by Bill, who frequently has observed that he fires blanks. But Chelsea Clinton is the offspring of Hillary Clinton and Webster Hubbell, who then put pressure on Janet Reno, who really didn't want to attack, but sent in, the feds. I've seen aerial photographs. You can see the automatic fire being fired from the FBI into the Waco compound. They sent in a tank that put the structure on fire, and 84 people were burned to death by the feds because Hillary was upset that she was working on health control, and all the news was covering was Waco. So she wanted to get Waco out of the way so they could get back to the real issues of Hillary. I mean, if you may or may not want to count those as on the Clinton death list, I think they belong.
That does skew the numbers higher. Okay.
I think we could independently get to 200 even without Waco. But, you had 5 or 6 just revolving around the DNC. You had Julian Assange's attorney, who was a great human rights lawyer who was pushed in front of a subway in London. You had the fellow who served a class action lawsuit on behalf of Bernie Sanders supporters, dies mysteriously. You have Seth Rich, of course, who was shot on the street. He actually
the lawyer down in Fort Lauderdale or Hollywood Beach, I guess.
That's right. Who washed up on the beach, not far from the home of the judge who was supervising the investigation. You had a UN official who was going to testify against Hillary about child trafficking in relation to Haiti. This guy's a weightlifter. He's in great shape, and he's found with his throat crushed by a barbell. And
what about this bag lady, this Kate Spade? I sent you some links on that.
Yeah, Kate Spade, who looks like a good person. She must have figured out something, and Hillary thought it was a threat. These are very, very nasty people. Very, very nasty people. So, and the child trafficking in which they've been engaged in all that. One of the reasons for inventing the Russian hacking meme, which was made up by John Podesta and Robbie Mook within 24 hours of Hillary's concession speech, was not only to distract attention from the incompetent campaign they had run, but also from the contents of the WikiLeaks revelations, which led directly to Pizzagate, where John Podesta himself is pedophile in chief, and also from Hillary's own entanglements with Russia, whereas I may have reported before. She sold off 20% of U.S. uranium reserves to Russia for a $145 million donation to the Clinton Foundation with the approval of Barack Obama. And I say, look, if Julius and Ethel Rosenberg got the electric chair for sharing U.S. atomic secrets with the then Soviet Union, what do Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama deserve for selling off 20% of U.S. uranium to Russia?
Crazy, crazy stuff.
And, of course, Hillary, by the way, was responsible for the slaughter of Libya, which may have been the most humane society ever realized on the face of Earth. Gaddafi was sharing the wealth of Libya with the people, national health care, national public education, national warehouses stocked with food. If you had a medical problem couldn't be dealt with in Libya, he'd fly you and a friend or relative anywhere in the world, all expense paid by the government, to have it treated. He was also introducing the Great Waterworks Project that would have turned North Africa into a veritable oasis, and the gold dinar, which would have rapidly become the currency of all of Africa. But it turns out, we know from WikiLeaks releases too, that the French were upset with Gaddafi's growing influence because they wanted to keep Africa as their own neo-colonial preserve, and the Rothschilds were upset with the gold dinar. In fact, it was when the alleged rebel group in Libya, as their first action, founded a new central bank, that I knew the whole thing was totally baloney. Hillary got NATO in there, slaughtering the Libyan people. Rape became ubiquitous. Gaddafi actually didn't put up a fight. He surrendered to a location specified by the Department of State and was traveling there in a convoy under a white flag of surrender when Hillary had it interdicted and had him brutally murdered, castrated, and sodomized with a bayonet.
Oh, my God.
That's the level of people we're talking with here, the quality.
Never, ever have I heard, and someone, correct me if I'm wrong, but in all of these TV shows, networks, the phrase Clinton body count has never, ever been mentioned. I just find it just
well, the whole media is so controlled. Look. I mean, you're getting absurdities. Like this New York Times feel-good story about Charlottesville. I mean, it was ridiculous. They've got a new one. They've got a brand new story here, tying together Parkland with the Holocaust, and this is another tell that this is a Zionist op. I mean, they use phrases like "never again," which in the past have been sacrosanct. That's only supposed to apply to Holocaust. Never again. A part of the mythology about World War II. Which I've done my own research on the end of World War II. I've collaborated with the best people. I've got 4 chapters on the Moon book. And I suppose we didn't go to the moon either, which was, it was intended to be our second book. Mike Palachuk, who's a series editor, suggested the title is a sequel to Nobody Died at Sandy Hook, because someone might well reply, and I suppose we didn't go to the moon either. But we didn't go to the moon either. It's got 4 chapters on the moon. We got 4 chapters on the death and replacement of Paul McCartney. It's got 2 chapters on the first death of Saddam Hussein, 2 on the second death of Osama bin Laden, and then 4 chapters about the Holocaust by excellent people, including Thomas Dalton, who published a book entitled The Holocaust and Debate, Robert Forrison, who may be the leading revisionist historian of all, another by Nick Kollerstrom, who published a recent book, 2009, as I recall, entitled Breaking the Spell, demonstrating how the British had cracked the German code and were keeping records of everything the Germans were transmitting, and because they were so meticulous, they included all very specific details about the deaths and the camps and their causes and all that. Well, of course, the International Committee of the Red Cross had been visiting all those camps and keeping records of the age, sex, nationality, ethnicity, religion of those who died in their cause of death, which they updated in 1993 with a grand total of 296,081, not one of whom died from being put to death in a gas chamber. In fact, Robert Forrison has an absolutely sensational article entitled The Zundel Trials, 1985 and 1988, where Ernst Zundel was a prominent Canadian who was prosecuted for Holocaust denial. And it was very interesting. There were 2 trials. The first, the prosecution was unable to produce a single witness who could swear to seeing anyone put to death in a gas chamber in any of the camps. The second, in 1988, may be even more sensational, because the defense tracked down the leading expert in the United States on gas chambers by the name of Fred Lauchter, who went to Germany, visited the camps, came back with like a 135-page report and 13 samples, demonstrating conclusively that none of the facilities alleged could possibly have served the function of a gas chamber. It turns out that the 6 million, there are 236 references to 6 million Jews in dire straits or fear of loss of their lives in the international press before the Nuremberg tribunals, beginning as early as 1890, none of which, of course, had anything to do with World War II. And in fact, it turns out not only is there no historical or empirical evidence to support it, but the whole number appears to be derived from a disputed passage in Leviticus that's interpreted to declare that the chosen people can return to the promised land only when they're minus 6 million who have been consumed in the flames. But even that requires interpolation because there was no word in the original Hebrew for 6 million. So that what Vic Collerstrom discovered was that the British death books confirm the International Committee of the Red Cross numbers. So there were less than 300,000 who died from all causes. If you study, for example, the plan for Auschwitz, you find it had a woodworking shop, it had a hospital with OBGYN facilities, it had a concert area, they even had a swimming pool. In fact, it turns out hundreds of babies were born in these death camps, which is completely inconsistent with the idea that they were centers of extermination. They were using Zyklon B, by the way, which is a mild form of cyanide to kill body lice to prevent the spread of typhus and dysentery because they wanted to maintain the health of the inmates for the obvious reason. These were labor camps, and you can't get work out of a corpse. So we've been sold a massive pottage. The ADL in 2017 asked Jeff Bezos, the head of Amazon, which had banned my Sandy Hook book, to ban all books dealing with the Holocaust from a revisionist perspective. He banned hundreds of books, including my second, and I suppose we didn't go to the moon either. I mean, it's just embarrassingly bad.
Steve, what about the black and white silent motion pictures that all of us have seen in 7th and 8th grade of the bodies being thrown in ditches and all of that?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. There's the chapter from Robert Forrison in the book is entitled "Against Hollywoodism, Revisionism," where he talks about how they had, this staggering amount of footage, and they brought in a Hollywood director, and he edited it down and used about 7% to show, and this is what we've seen constantly. There were big pits of mass graves, but those weren't from the concentration camps. Those appear to have been from the Eastern Front. There were a lot of people who were being killed, and they were buried in these mass pits. What you don't see the way it was edited is there are British bulldozers who are covering over the mass bodies. But look, there was a Holocaust in a very broad sense. Lots of people, millions, were being killed. But the Nazis did not have a plan to exterminate the Jews. Hitler was unhappy because they were controlling the financial system, and he felt he had to impose rigorous borders and get the Jews out of the financial system in Germany. But you see, this has happened maybe 100 times with other countries where the same thing has happened. It turns out that the Jews are very tribalistic, and they practice an evolutionary strategy of benefiting one another. It's rather as though the Jewish community were a variation on Skull and Bones, where their members take a pledge to benefit one another and never take any action that's adverse to the interests of another member of Skull and Bones, which is why, Jews eschew interracial marriage, but they promote it for everyone else. I think that the model is very much that of Charles Manson. If you ever read Helter Skelter, where Vince Bugliosi prosecuted Manson and discovered the theme, the reason for these brutal murders was that Manson was trying to precipitate a race war between blacks and whites. He believed that the blacks were stronger and would prevail over the whites, but they were also dumber and would need leadership. So after the blacks took out the whites, he and his clan would emerge from the mountains to provide leadership. I think these Talmudic Jews, and I reiterate, I'm not talking about the vast majority of Jews who are very good people. I'm talking about these people who believe in the Jewish superiority and their entitlement to abuse the Goyim, the non-Jews, any way they want, which is consistent with these statements we get from Menachem Begin, from Ariel Sharon, and from Bibi Netanyahu about exploiting and destroying. it's so ironic, Fred, because the United States has been the great benefactor of Israel, but I think it's all calamitous. They don't believe they owe anyone anything, and they're going to do whatever they want. I mean, look at the slaughter of the Palestinians in Gaza here. I think this was very illuminating for the world that, that you have the Israeli Defense Forces slaughtering the Gazans. They were actually using butterfly bullets that open up and expand and do massive bodily harm. They're internationally proscribed. And yet, when the United Nations sought to pass a resolution to condemn Israel, the United States vetoed it. And when they passed another resolution to protect the Palestinians, although there were 10 votes in favor with 4 abstentions, the U.S. vetoed it again. We're on the wrong side of history. Nikki Haley is a disgrace. Donald Trump's Zionist foreign policy, I'm just appalled. When I read the book about Fire and Fury regarding the campaign, I came away with the indelible impression that the major figures in his campaign were all avid Zionists promoting Israel. And, of course, we all remember when he spoke before AIPAC that he'd be the strongest supporter of Israel that they'd ever had as president of the United States. Bibi Netanyahu these days boasts he's virtually giddy over having control of the United States. And he believes Israel is very secure and its future is assured. I'm not at all confident that's the case, but that's certainly how he feels today.
Hey, Jim, we're going to open it up for comments and questions. Anybody out there, just *6 your phone. If you are on TalkShoe, just text in, and we'll go ahead. Anybody, Sam?
Yeah, I got a couple questions. Before I ask the questions, Jim, could you make some comments on Trump and Iran, and then Bibi Netanyahu, he went to Europe to get the, Iran deal and all that crap. You know what I mean? And Saudi Arabia, apparently Saudi Arabia and Israel want the United States to go to war against Iran so that our boys get killed, and the Shiite and Sunni. Could you comment on that? And then I got a couple questions to ask you.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Bibi's trying to provoke. Well, actually, he's got a multiple agenda. I think he'd like to provoke a war between the U.S. and Russia and then emerge, to lead the world very much as Manson would after a race war in the United States. He's certainly wanting to try to provoke a war with Iran. Now, I believe that when Trump pulled out of the Iran deal, which had no rational basis whatsoever, if you're an American or if you're, you believe in the United Nations or equality among nations, on the ground that it was going to expire in 2025, well, you could always renegotiate it, but also on the ground that the inspectors weren't inspecting all the military sites in Iran. Why should they be? They were inspecting all the nuclear sites, which was what was covered, and that Iran should curtail its ballistic missile system, but that's purely defensive. I mean, Trump's objections were ridiculous, that he brought in John Bolton and Mike Pompeo now. I mean, these are avid Iran hawks. These are very, very bad people, and I'm very distressed with the situation here. I believe that Europe would stand with Iran in relation to the Iran deal, but it turns out they're folding now under pressure, not from the gas and oil companies, but from the banks. In other words, the Zionists who control the banks of the Rothschild banking empire are putting pressure on the companies to not buy Iranian crude, so that they're leaving Iran hanging out to dry. I'm hopeful that China is going to step into the breach and purchase a whole lot of that Iranian oil, because that would be a just thing to do. The supreme leader of Iran had made a statement about what he expected of the European countries, including that they would continue to buy Iranian oil and adhere to the provisions of the Iran deal. I actually thought he had made a mistake thereby, because it wasn't necessary. Everyone who's a student of the Middle East knows what's going on there, and therefore it would appear that if they were, taking the measures that he was proposing, they were doing so because he proposed it rather than because they were just and the right thing to do. So I felt his saying it created a complication. But the fact that they're folding and, not going to buy Iranian crude, that's very, very bad. I do think inevitably Europe is going to be drawn more toward Russia, that Russia's influence in the Middle East is going to grow, Iran's influence is going to grow. Iran is a great nation. I mean, I cannot believe the extent to which Iran has been demonized, because Iran has not launched a war of aggression against any other nation since 1775. Just to put that in perspective, the ratification of the Constitution began in 1787. George Washington was elected our first president in 1789. So for longer than the United States has existed as a constitutional republic, Iran has not launched a war of aggression against any other nation. I mean, the absurd things you hear about Iran being the source of aggression in the Middle East are ridiculous. The source of aggression in the Middle East are Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the United States. We are the great aggressor nations. In fact, the United States is the greatest aggressor nation in the world that the world has ever seen. I'll go that far.
Yeah. Okay. I want to mention the Talmud, Jim.
Yeah.
In the Talmud, they say the Virgin Mary is the prostitute, number one. Number two, Jesus Christ is down in hell boiling in his excrement.
Right.
That's in the Talmud.
How bad is that?
Yeah.
Well, it's these Talmudic Jews that are the problem. I mean, well, most Muslims, most Christians, most Jews are decent people. But there are sects within each group or subdivisions that are very nasty players. And in this case, the Israelis are particularly virulent. They want to rule the world, and they're going to manipulate their way to do it. They've been very clever and achieved a certain degree of success, although they have been kicked out of over 100 countries for their shenanigans. So, there's something about stereotypes that has a basis in history in relation to these issues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think they're going to get, if the American people would be informed about the Talmudic Zionist Talmudic Jew, I think they'd be kicked out of America. But the American people are dumbed down,
Americans are so gullible. Americans are so ignorant. Americans know nothing about history. Most Americans believe that Iran drew first blood by taking over our embassy in 1979. They're completely oblivious of the fact that the CIA had executed a coup in Iran and deprived it of its democratically elected government in 1953. So the Iranians were simply retaking control of a country from the Shah, who was a puppet that we'd installed. Most Americans are unaware that Ukraine is a democratic country, and that Victoria Nuland, using $5 billion American dollars with another $500 million from George Soros, executed a purple revolution in Ukraine and drove out the democratically elected president and installed a puppet. I mean, their claims to be, the champions of freedom and democracy are ludicrous when you compare them with our actual actions in the world. They have no basis whatsoever. They're just slogans, propaganda to neutralize opposition by the American people.
All right. What about World War III? What is your plan? When do you think that'll break out? And who's speaking?
Well, you know what Einstein said. He said, he wasn't sure what weapons would be used, but during the next war, which would be World War III. But he knew that the war after that would be fought using sticks and stones. So, Israel, of course, has a vast arsenal of nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons they've never declared. They're not signatories to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. According to our own foreign policy guidelines, we're not allowed to give foreign aid to a country that has undeclared weapons of mass destruction, and yet we do it regularly. We give Israel, make an exception to every rule. It's just really outrageous. I reached a point where I'm completely sick of it. It's taken me so long to figure out what's really going on here. I only gave my first political speech on 15 April 2008. It was a Ron Paul Freedom Rally on the grass outside the Capitol in Washington, D.C. I gave a talk that would subsequently be published under the title 9/11 and the Neocon Agenda, where I explained how, the project for the new American century was just staffed with all these dual U.S. Israeli citizens. They were proposing that the United States could create a new American empire that would endure with the next 100 years if only we move aggressively into the Middle East and exert military and diplomatic pressure outward from that geopolitically sensitive region. But it had nothing to do with the United States or a new American empire. It had to do with getting the United States in there to fight these wars for Israel. And that was the whole reason for organizing and orchestrating 9/11, to give a pseudo-justification for getting the U.S. in there to fight these wars for Israel. I mean, they're users. They are users. It's like the Bush family has this other people's money. I mean, they don't invest their own money. They invest other people's money. These Israelis fight wars using other people's resources, other nations, especially the United States. And we have just played along stupidly, cutting off our nose to spite our face.
Okay. Could you comment on the Golan Heights, number one, and also Greater Israel, which is the objective, I think, of Israel going on?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well, that's the last comment, Sam. You're up. Your time's up.
Okay. Let me comment on those later.
No. I'll comment on it right now. No. Yeah, there's
go ahead.
Plan
you can reply. Go ahead.
To develop the Greater Israel, it takes large portions of Syria and Iraq. I mean, it's granting to Israel all of the land between the Tigris, Euphrates, and the Nile. In fact, if you look at the Israeli flags, there's a blue stripe at the top and a blue stripe at the bottom. I'm convinced they represent the Tigris, Euphrates, and the Nile. And the presumptive entitlement to all that land, it has no legitimate historical basis, but that's their claim. And, with regard to the Golan, it's very, very interesting. I have seen that Congress is even contemplating a measure to declare the Golan Heights a part of Israel, but it's Syrian property. Not only is it Syrian property, but I have seen geological reports that there's a vast supply of gas or oil in the Golan Heights, which is why they'd want to seize it. You notice when they had that alleged attack on Israel, it was lobbing missiles, which I think Israel was firing itself into the Golan Heights, not actually into Israel. I mean, I'm telling you, these are past masters at the false flag. The Israel was created on the basis of false flag attacks, in part because you had this Irgun gang dressed as Arabs blowing up the King David Hotel in 1946 to drive the British out of Palestine. I mean, there's one after another. The USS Liberty, 1967, where Israeli planes sought to sink an American spy ship. Lyndon Johnson was involved in that. When the area commander sent American fighters to protect the Liberty, Johnson had them called back. He wanted the ship sunk to justify U.S. entering the war on the side of Israel against Egypt. Moshe Dayan didn't need any help. I mean, he mopped things up without our assistance, but Lyndon was deeply involved in that, just as he was in taking out his predecessor, JFK. So, all very, very bad stuff.
All right.
They're going to be relentless. That is their goal, and they're going to be relentless in pursuing it. There's no question about it. See, the idea about that 9/11 and getting the U.S. in there is to balkanize, break up all these countries. I mean, you had major secular nations. Saddam Hussein was a secular leader. He had conflicting factions of Sunni, Shia, and Kurds in Iraq, so it required a strong hand. But the Iraqis were much better off with Saddam than they are now that he's gone. Libya has a strong Syria has a strong secular leader in Bashar al-Assad, who's actually a very noble guy and greatly admired by the Syrian people. Muammar Gaddafi wasn't pushing a religious line. I mean, he was a great humanitarian. And, the way these people get demonized for political purposes is completely disgraceful.
Anybody else? Thank you, Sam. Comment or question?
I'll say just a couple of words about Bobby if you want, because I think I never get to it. Okay. The takeout there involved a collusion between the CIA, the Los Angeles Police Department.
We're talking about Bobby Kennedy, guys. Bobby Kennedy.
Yeah, exactly. When Bobby won the primary, he was supposed to exit going out through the grand ballroom, not through the pantry. But the trusted assistant led him to the pantry and to his death. That was Frank Mankiewicz, I'm convinced, betrayed him, and I think he was doing so on behalf of Israel. Sirhan unloaded an 8-shot. Sirhan had been hypnotized. He reflexively fired off 8 shots from his .22 caliber weapon, but none of them hit Bobby Kennedy. On the other hand, there was a security guard that was holding Bobby by the right arm. His name was Thane Eugene Caesar, who also had a .22. When Sirhan started firing, Caesar shot Bobby behind the right ear from a distance of 1.5 inches. As Bobby was firing, he fired 3 more shots, 2 of which entered Bobby's body underneath his armpit, one of which hit his cervical vertebrae. Another bullet passed through his jacket, but didn't hit his body. As Bobby was falling, he grabbed Caesar's tie, and his tie clasp wound up on the floor of the pantry. You can see it in some photographs. So he was, trying to let us know who had committed this atrocious crime. But it was a setup. There's a psychiatrist who boasted about having hypnotized. I think it was the son of Sam, but also Sirhan. Notice Sirhan's a Palestinian. Who's going to want to blame this on a Palestinian? Who would want to have archival footage of Palestinians rejoicing broadcasts between the destruction of the North Tower and the South Tower and the North Tower when you had like the world's largest audience? As though these were Palestinians rejoicing in the events of 9/11. They were just as slack-jawed and stunned as the rest of the world, but they just happened to have this archival footage at hand. They also had a planted phone call from the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine claiming responsibility. Completely absurd. This is a very sophisticated, high-tech op. Most analysts agree there were only 2 agencies in the world that could have pulled it off, the CIA and the Mossad, and in that case, they were acting in concert. So the whole thing is a shame. The autopsy was done under the supervision of Thomas Noguchi that established, the shots that I described. And would you believe the influence of the LAPD was so powerful that because his account conflicted with that of the LAPD, he was fired. The LAPD actually dismantled the pantry and then destroyed all the features of the pantry that showed, in excess of bullet holes, bullets having been fired beyond 8.
Kidding me. Isn't that something?
And
my God.
They destroyed it on the ground. It wouldn't fit into a 3x4 card file. Did you catch that last part, Fred? They destroyed the pantry on the ground. It wouldn't fit into a 3x4 card file. I did an interview. In 2017, I did an interview with a TV show out of LA called Truth Be Told, and I just recommend it. It's about 55 minutes long. You can find it online. Truth Be Told, who really killed Robert F. Kennedy. I've been astonished that Bobby Jr. has only now said that he believes Sirhan wasn't responsible and that there was a second shooter. But we've known this for quite a long time. In fact, in my opinion, the Bobby case is really cut and dry. It's very straightforward. Three CIA officials, by the way, were observed at the Ambassador Hotel that night. One was a key guy in the CIA by the name of George Ioannidis. He was involved in PSYOPs for the agency. His is the most closely guarded file. They have not released it in spite of laws requiring they do so. Another was Gordon Campbell, and the third was David Sanchez Morales. Brad Ayers, whom I knew personally, was an Army captain assigned to the CIA at their JM Wave station in Miami. It's the only CIA facility other than, of course, headquarters at Langley ever permitted on U.S. soil. It was doing gun running and hits guns and Cuba and all that. And had met all these people himself personally, and even Bobby Kennedy, who came to Jam Wave at one point to visit the station. He identified them at the ambassador, Wayne Smith, who was an actual ambassador, as opposed to the name of the hotel, identified one of them he knew very, very well. Two American journalists, Jefferson Morley and David Talbot, claimed they had investigated these allegations and there was nothing to it, but that was dirty work of the CIA. I will tell you, in my opinion, they were clearly trying to, tie together some loose ends, because I went back over the whole case and I found there was just a mass of evidence and witnesses about all of this that they had obfuscated, and it was very, very bad. You can find my article about it online, entitled RFK outing the CIA at the ambassador. I have another article entitled JFK and RFK, the plots that killed them, the patsies that didn't, at voltairenet.org, which is an international journal edited by Thierry Masson, who is one of the most respected intellectuals in the world.
Hey, everyone, this will be archived on our YouTube channel, and some of these links will be posted graphically and will also be available in the subheading by Steve Sun. One last question, Jim. In the interview recently, Bobby Kennedy's nephew, Robert, told Tucker Carlson that he had strong evidence after JFK was assassinated, that Bobby lost his authority over the investigative powers of the Justice Department, namely the FBI, et cetera, and that all of these people would report right after JFK was assassinated directly to Lyndon Johnson. Is that, I'd never heard that before. Is there truth to that?
Well, sure. I mean, he was Attorney General, but look, I mean, Lyndon, who was the president, had been responsible. He was the pivotal player. He and J. Edgar, who was nominally his subordinate, had him boxed in. I mean, Bobby had no authority after Jack was taken out. There was a phone that Bobby had installed in Hoover's office, which Hoover promptly disconnected, so that Hoover personally would have to answer when Bobby called. He was completely boxed out. They weren't reporting to Lyndon. They were reporting to Nicholas Katzenbach, who was a deputy of the CIA and who authored a memorandum that we published in Assassination Science in 1998 about how the American people needed to be persuaded that Lee Oswald was a lone assassin and that there had been no conspiracy. And of course, the Warren Commission was essentially convened in order to accomplish that task. In fact, Bertrand Russell, published over 100 books, wrote a critique before the Warren Report was published, but when its outline and contents were becoming known, saying, why was there no section of the report about who killed Kennedy? And that's, of course, because they begged the question. They already knew who killed him. They knew
Yeah. All right. One last call out there. Anybody out there real quick, and then we're going to wrap this up.
Yeah. Hey. I got two more. Oh, okay. I got two.
Wait, Sam, there's another voice out there. Wait a minute, Sam.
Okay. Go ahead. So can I go now, or?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. You mentioned David Berkowitz, Son of Sam. I was just going to tell him that Stacy Moskowitz, who was killed by the Son of Sam, was a child. When I was a child, she was a friend of mine, and I had spoken to her the night before she got killed by the Son of Sam. I was a little kid, and I was walking up the road, and I was joking with her, and I said, "You want to go out sometime?" She teased back with me. And I just wanted to let you know I knew Stacy Moskowitz.
That's very touching and very sad.
Yeah, I just want to let you know.
Yeah, very, very interesting.
Yeah,
I just want to let you know. Like a 400-pounder. I talk about the psychiatrist in that interview I did with Truth Be Told in 2017. It's actually pretty comprehensive. I listened to it again before the show just to remind myself of details about it. You know, that I did a fair amount of research reviewing the evidence before I did that particular interview, and so it's got quite a lot in it. Be glad to take those 2 more questions from Sam. I mean, if I don't.
These are important questions. Number one, do you think these are 2 questions. Number one, do you think the Rothschilds were behind the Civil War? Number one. Number 2, why was Lincoln assassinated? Now, there's a book out, Lincoln Money Martyred. So, could you comment on Lincoln assassination and the Civil War?
Well, I got to admit, I can't claim to be an expert on Lincoln's assassination, although it was obvious a conspiracy. I mean, there was a simultaneous attack on him as vice president and his secretary of state. We had 4 of the conspirators who were hung on the same gallows at the same time, including the first woman ever put to death by the United States. It's entirely possible it had to do with money supply, you know. The whole idea of a central bank was anathema to the founding fathers. They thought it would be a colossal mistake. Jack, of course, was seeking to circumvent the Fed by having United States notes published that were non-interest bearing. I mean, compound interest may be the greatest evil ever designed by the mind of man. And, you know, just for having a printing press, you have this consortium of private banks that makes fabulous sums of money for printing the currency of the United States. That's simply absurd. The United States can print its own money. We don't need the Fed, and we can't even get the Fed to be audited. Look how Ron Paul has spent
absolutely
decade after decade. No one in Washington has the guts. I mean, this whole Congress is really despicable. And did I mention how Cynthia McKinney had revealed that when a new member of Congress comes to Washington, D.C., they're asked to sign a pledge to put the interests of Israel ahead of those of the United States? And those who do not sign find themselves confronted with a well-financed alternative candidate, or even that their district has been redrawn and they no longer had a seat. Cynthia was able to transcend those obstacles, but others, even including Dennis Kucinich, who in my opinion was the smartest member of Congress, have not. Gary King asked me recently, did I know how many members of the present Congress refused to sign the pledge? I acknowledge I did not. He held up one finger of one hand, one member of Congress. You want to know why we're being sold down the river? That's the reason.
I think Russia...
I was just going to say, I think Trump's as frustrated by our Congress as anyone else.
Well, I still think he has good intentions. You know, I think domestically, I think his foreign policy's been co-opted. I mean, I thought he was utterly sincere when he talked about the mistake of getting involved in the Middle East and the trillions. There is I think, a surprise coming, because the fellow who was a special ambassador in negotiating the dissolution of the Soviet Union on behalf of Ronald Reagan, Lee Wanta, with Mikhail Gorbachev, was given a vast benefit that now, because of the accumulation of interest, it is in value of excess of $27 trillion. His name is Lee Wanta. He called me, he's called me once in a blue moon, and I turned to my wife and I say, you wouldn't believe I was just speaking to the richest man in the world. Well, Dick Cheney has had the money bottled up, but the court has now directed it's got to be released to him, and he's wanted to use it to benefit the American people, pay off our national debt, create national high-speed trains all over the country, and other good events. This man, Lee Wanta, is a great American, and I think he may be able to enable Trump to make America great again by giving the finance.
And that's through NASARA, right?
Pardon me?
It has to do with NASARA, the program that Lee Wanta is espousing?
I think that's separate. I think NASARA was kind of a head fake created many years ago. But I think there's more truth to what Lee Wanta, from what I understand.
Oh, yeah.
Have you actually talked to this guy, Lee Wanta?
Oh, yeah. I talked to him.
God.
I've talked to him probably six or eight times.
Holy
So-
crap!
So, Jim, do you know about CERCO and the Senior Executive Service and the effect the obstruction?
Yeah,
I think that's
be 500 key players in the Department of Justice who control the salaries of 10,000, and they be the actual core of the deep state because supposedly they can't be removed from office. I understood that part of the negotiation for this last budget bill included a clause that enabled Trump to set their salary. So while he couldn't remove them from office, he could set their salary at, say, $1 a year.
Yeah, the holding clause. The holding clause.
I just am not in a position to verify, what I would like to believe is the case, because this looks pretty serious.
Well, it is, and that's where the 10,000 obstructionists they call Obama's army, and it was started, by Carter and Christine Marcy.
This Barack Obama guy is going to go down in history as one of the most disgusting occupants. Not only did they fake his candidacy, it turns out Howard Dean, Nancy Pelosi, Hillary Clinton were all involved in certifying Obama, who was ineligible to run as president. He actually was born in Kenya. Trump gets endlessly trashed for these true things he observes, just as Ted Cruz's father was in front of the trademark with Lee Oswald when he was handing out Fair Play for Cuba pamphlets. He was also in Dealey Plaza on Main Street, just outside of the square where Jack was taken out with Antonio Veciana. Turns out, ironically, a colored photograph I put on the cover of my first JFK book, of which I now have 4, all, involving multiple contributors, the most recent being entitled JFK, Who, How, and Why, that you can get at moonrockbooks.com, 2017, which is an update of the latest research on JFK. There's this famous color photograph taken by a Dallas newsman that I put on my cover, and believe it or not, in the upper right-hand corner, there is Rafael Cruz standing beside Antonio Veciana, the founder of Alpha 66, among the most vicious of the anti-Cuba organizations. So he wasn't a shooter, of course, but he was on the periphery. He undoubtedly knew what was happening. Once again, Trump makes a true observation. Get this. Richard Charnon has just gone back over, tabulated the popular vote, and believe it or not, Donald Trump won the popular vote by 13 million.
Oh, yeah, and he's been obstructed by the SCS, the obstructionist in there, and it's ridiculous what he...
No, I know, but I'm just making the simple point that he calls out, Obama by being the birther, and he's savage for it when it's true. And I've done research on this myself. I tell you it's true. He's called out Ted Cruz's father was on the periphery of JFK's assassination. Well, he was on the periphery of JFK's assassination. He said there was something wrong about the popular vote. Turns out he's right again. I mean, time after time after time, what Trump has said was true, and yet he's been pilloried in the press, which is completely dominated by the scientists. I have 3 panels of 100 executives from CNN, every one of whom is a dual U.S.-Israeli citizen, a panel of 100 from NBC, every one of which is a dual U.S.-Israeli citizen, a panel from the New York Times, 100 officials, every one of which is a dual U.S.-American citizen. This is the problem. We don't have a free press. It's completely contained. It's completely controlled by the Zionists, and these are not good people and they don't care about the United States. They care about Israel.
Hey, I think that's a wrap, guys. That is the official wrap for this show.
Great, Fred.
No, wait a minute. I got one more question for Jim.
All right, last one.
Yeah, Jim, you got to. This is an important question. This is about the Bolshevik Revolution. I understand Russia helped Lincoln during the Civil War, number 1, and then Rothschild had 3 czars killed, number 2. And then you had the Bolshevik Revolution, which was Lenin and Trotsky. We were Zionists. Okay, could you comment on that? How this all came about?
I really gotta tell you that I can give you good answers where I've done enough research, but I haven't done enough research on this specific issue to give you a responsible answer. So I want to thank you all for featuring me once again. I mean, I think this is a wonderful program, and it's just
Jim,
a delight.
We'll send you this video. We'll send you the video to share. And please, everyone, subscribe to our channel, aunetwork.tv. The graphics will be put up over the next week. We'll be sure to give it to everyone out there. It'll be posted on the website as well. Thank you, Jim Fetzer.
Yeah, Jim, research about the Civil War. Research about Russia.
Good night, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
All right.
Thanks, Fred.
See you next.
Thanks,
see you
Jim.
next one. Have a good one, guys. God bless. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Dee Dee. Everyone. Take care.
AUN, American Underground Network.